Hello, you cool cats and kittens. It's Carol Baskin, and you are listening to Fascination Street.
I believe that everybody has a story, and I'm fascinated to hear them. So come with me as we take a walk down Fascination Street. Welcome back, Streetwalkers. This episode is with Alan Bishop. Alan is the lead distiller and the head alchemist at Spirits of French Lick Distillery in French Lick, Indiana. In this episode, we talk about his family history of distilling, both legal and not so much. We talk about how he decided to stick with that path and get into the distillation game professionally. We talk a lot about Spirits of French Lick Distillery, some of the products they offer, and why Alan is so enamored with the history of bourbon in that region of the United States. There's tons of stories about bootleggers and pioneers in the industry whose names would otherwise not be known were they not on the labels of some of these fine products. On almost every episode of this show, I'm recording it while I'm drinking bourbon. So this is a great honor to have this lead distiller on the show. It was great to get to speak with him and find out how nerdy he really could be. He does get into it somewhat as far as some of the terminology and some of the history. And if you want to know more about that, you can just look up those things that he was talking about. Or better yet, you can check out his podcast, which is called Distiller's Talk, and is hosted by him and Christy Atkinson. It's available everywhere you get podcasts. Also, you can check out his book, his website, all those things he mentions in the episode. If you like bourbon or spirits of any kind, really, you are going to love this episode. This was recorded during all the self-distancing due to the coronavirus outbreak. So if that is over by now, woohoo. If not, damn it. But either way, this is my conversation with lead distiller and Indiana bourbon historian, Alan Bishop, of Spirits of French Lick Distillery. Yeah, talk to me, yeah. Welcome to Fascination Street Podcast, Alan Bishop. How you doing today, man?
Doing great, man. How are you?
I am wonderflonium. Let me just start off by saying, holy shit, it's the Alan Bishop.
The Alan Bishop. I've got my own day and everything. It went from a national holiday this past year on October 20th to this year it's going to be international with at least, one or two people in another country across the sea celebrating Alan Bishop Day. So
why that day?
It started off as a joke with another podcast. I think they were picking at me a little bit and trying to troll me a little bit. And then I saw it and I was like, you know what? I'm going to take fucking advantage of this. It's not every day that you get a holiday named after yourself, nor that you can share, a meme to social media of a shocker and the tagline being solidarity through sarcasm.
That is fantastic. Listeners, Streetwalkers, I mentioned it previously on the Jolie Kaspersek episode, but I want to point out again that this episode right here with the Alan Bishop is only happening because of our mutual buddy, Jesse Vest. Jesse Vest is a previous guest and a friend of the show. He is the founding bass player of Days of the New, Tantric, and now Blitzkrieg. Alan, how do you know Jesse?
We don't live too far apart. I'm from Pekin, Indiana, and he's from down in Charlestown. And, of course, Days of the New, I was a huge Days of the New fan. And we ran in some very similar circles and knew a lot of the same people. Although we didn't know each other all that well directly, we forged a pretty good friendship out of it. I've known some of the other guys that were in that band in Days of the New and Tantric both. But every time I talk to Jesse, there's a 14-year-old version of me somewhere that is just losing his shit. Like, holy shit, it's Jesse Vest, But yeah, Days of the New was a huge influence on me. Tantric as well. But really, all three of the Days of the New albums, but particularly the Yellow album, the Orange album, that still gets played a lot when I'm working on new projects for inspiration. And the new Blitzkrieg album, I've been burning that thing up.
It's amazing, right?
Yeah, Jesse and those guys. I mean, if anybody can capture lightning a third time, that's who it's going to be. Those guys.
Yeah.
For one half of that group to be from Indiana and then, the third from Louisville, the Indiana connection for me is a big damn deal. So when I think Indiana and I think music, I don't think fucking Johnny Cougar. I think fucking Days of the New and Tantric. So
Johnny Cougar. I love it. Well, all that said, thank you, Jesse. I appreciate you making this happen. You are a dope fool. I appreciate you. So, Alan, the way I like to get started is tell me about you were born and raised, man. Where'd you grow up?
yeah, I grew up in a town called Pekin, Indiana. It's not a whole lot there. It was an old railroad town. The only real claim to fame that we have is that we have the longest consecutive 4th of July celebration in the United States, which really just started out in like 1830 as an excuse for everybody to get drunk. So I grew up in a family of distillers, both legal and illicit, between both sides of the river, Indiana and Kentucky. I still live in Pekin to this day. I'll probably never leave. I'm a lifer. I don't know if that's good or not. I question it on a daily basis a lot of times. But, you know, everybody that I knew growing up is mostly still there. And the ones that aren't are basically assholes anyways. So that's all good.
I think it's cool that, you know, a lot of people search to find their home, and you were born in your home and you feel like it's home enough to stay. I think that's pretty cool. A lot of people don't do that.
I'm not going to lie to you. It's not paradise or anything. I love my town, but it's gone downhill because of same thing in every Midwestern or Appalachian town, whether it be methamphetamine or heroin or whatever. So I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that my house looks the most friendly in the world. I got a fence around it with a purple post and a spray painted sign that says there's nothing inside this fence worth dying for, but I ain't going anywhere. I was here before they were, so fuck them.
In that area, is meth and heroin a big deal?
Yeah,
Really?
there's not a whole lot going on. If you want to make decent money, you got to go out of the county. Boy, our county commissioners and that whole political organization, they couldn't punch their way out of a wet paper sack. You know, to be fair, they're overwhelmed with everything that's happened, but we're just far enough from Louisville for it not to matter how close we are to Louisville, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. It does make sense. So you don't live in French Lick?
No.
How far away are you?
About an hour drive.
Oh,
pretty close to it.
I love that you say that's close.
That's my private time right there, that hour drive to and from work. It gives me an hour every morning to kind of put on my big boy pants and get to work and get over whatever whines and cries and gripes I have for the morning. And it gives me an hour every evening to get this shit out of my system before I get home.
All right. Now, let's talk about your family. You come from a long line of distillers. Tell me about that. Oh, and also you use the word illicit.
Yes.
Tell me why you use that word instead of, I don't know, illegal?
Right. It sounds sexier. You know what I mean? It's branding. It's the same reason that, you know, these guys that buy in their product as distillers, they still brand themselves as craft distillers because craft rectifier doesn't sound nearly as sexy and it doesn't sell bottles as easily. So
what the hell is a rectifier?
Somebody who basically buys in all their product and rebottles it or does things to change it as opposed to making their own.
Gotcha.
And there's a lot of that in the industry. It is what it is. So, yeah, all of my family's actually from Kentucky. We've been living in Indiana for 3 generations now, although my grandparents, my mom, and everybody, they were actually born in Kentucky. Greensburg, Kentucky for the Bishops, and then Clay County, Kentucky for the Wilsons and the Bargers and all that stuff. So it's always been in my family. It's always been around. There's been distilling on both sides of the family for generations. There were a few folks in the family who did work legally for national distillers here and there over the years. But for the most part, it's just been, you know, like anybody from Appalachia or anybody with that particular cultural background, I guess it's kind of a birthright. So I grew up in a family of distillers and tobacco farmers. So I tell people I was kind of born into sin, one way or the other. You know, when I was a kid, it didn't seem odd to me, like being 3 or 4 and being around stills, right? For me, it's like another piece of farm equipment. It's like a tractor. Oh, great. Look, there's one more thing we have to do on Saturdays, so we can't go do anything fucking fun, you know, but it was a way for my family more than anything to be able to pay property taxes and maybe have some money left over for Christmas and that kind of stuff. And there wasn't really any romanticism in it other than my dad and my grandpa like to drink. You know, that is what it is. You know, it goes back several generations. I've never gotten too deep into trying to trace back how far back it goes. And I try not to make it too much of a part of the story of what we do at Spirits of French Lick, because once I got into it and really went deep down the rabbit hole, I tried to kind of skew in a different direction of, I don't want to just do this as a job. I love doing this. This is alchemy for me. This is magic. Everybody has some form of magic, whether it be like Jesse playing music or, you know, me making moonshine, whatever. This is my thing. It's the one thing that I'm really good at. If I wasn't doing this, I'd probably be digging ditches or something for a living. So I wanted to take it in an entirely different direction. You know, I do like to try to pay respect to that history of distillers in my family as much as possible. If it weren't for my dad and my grandpa, I would have never probably been interested in it. Even if they were doing things as basically as what they could, it still piqued my interest at some point in my life to where I wanted to get into this and go even further into it than what they ever had.
So your grandfather and your father, they both distilled spirits.
Yes.
Did they do it on the same still, and did they pass it down to you? Like, do you have like a third generation or more still?
I've got some old stills, but the ones that I have, my grandpa basically ran the hell out of until the copper's so thin on them, I'd be afraid to run them, or he burned the bottom out of a bunch of them. So the first one that I had, they helped me build when I was 15, and it was just a little 10-gallon. It was made out of stainless steel body, and it was actually an old coffee dispenser from Fort Knox, Kentucky. By the time you got that thing, what they call looted up, so adding all your bread dough and everything to it basically to seal it up because no gaskets fit it, right? Look like you're baking a damn cake or something. And it still leaked like a sieve. It's amazing I didn't blow myself up or set myself on fire with it.
That is hilarious. A lot of kids, when they're growing up, their dad maybe helps them refurbish a car or rebuild a car, but your dad helped you build a still. That is amazing.
I have an interesting family for sure.
I would say.
Most of what was done on the farm was basically real simple stuff, sugar shine, right? So corn and sugar, or really we did a lot of brandy, like apple and peach brandy, because, even to this day, a lot of places still have them. Pretty much every house in southern Indiana that's out in the middle of nowhere that has any age to it has got at least an apple tree or a peach tree or something in the yard. People don't mess with them anymore. So, you get a hold of that stuff for free. Hey, pick these up before the hornets get to them or whatever. So I don't, run over a hornet's nest whenever I'm mowing the yard or whatever. I did a lot of that, but I wanted to go further and do the all grain thing. But when I was about 15, that's when they built me that pot still. And they gave me 2 rules. And the 2 rules are don't blow your ass up in the backyard, bring us up when it's worth drinking. But they would not tell me how to do anything. I knew the things that they did because I'd seen them do it or I'd helped them with it before. But if I had a question, I would just shit out of luck. They weren't going to answer anything. And I actually credit that to the skills that I've developed because I didn't have anybody tell me that you couldn't do something a certain way, which means that you figure out a whole lot of ways that you can't do things and maybe 3 or 4 ways that you actually can do things successfully. And those 3 or 4 ways are differentiated enough from what is common in the bourbon industry that it just makes for a very unique style of distillation.
That makes sense. Back in the day when we couldn't just open up YouTube and figure out how to do something, you had to figure it out yourself. And it's not like you can go to the library and, look up, hey, how do I make bourbon? You couldn't do that.
Now you can buy a damn home still. There's, 15, 20 different sites you can buy a home distillation unit from. And that's another phrase I hate, by the way, is home distilling. It's fucking bullshit. It's moonshining. Whether you like it or not, it's moonshining. Whether you're selling it or not, it's still moonshining. Just, again, another sexier way of saying it, home distiller. But up until 6 or 7 years ago, there might have been 2 places online that you could have bought a still from, maybe. Then at that time, the TTB was still keeping track of, they'd have to keep, the producers would have to keep your address and your phone number and all that stuff for like a year. And the TTB backed off of that. And as soon as they backed off, man, open the gate. There's 1,000,001 places to buy still. Hell, you can buy them from Walmart.com. You can buy little stovetop stills from Walmart.com.
That's, what? Hold on. I gotta buy something real quick. So you grew up and your farm was a tobacco farm and then you converted it to...
Basically, we never went certified organic, but I got into basically truck farming is what I was into. And we called it ecologically grown. So the idea was that we'd use as few outside inputs as possible. We'd raise animals, compost, do that whole thing. Try to make it as sustainable as what we possibly could, the gardening and all that stuff. That was really just an excuse to play around with plant genetics because I got really interested in open pollinated plants and seeds and sustainability. And the problem that I ran into was in the Ohio Valley, there really aren't any heirlooms left. The heirlooms that are around as far as heirloom seeds go are things that were, previously commercial introductions in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And those are fine, but I want to throw damn watermelons out in the field and not do anything to them. You know what I mean? Let's see what kind of pressure they can take. And so that led me down this path of plant breeding and teaching myself how to make all these different crosses back and forth. I started a small seed company, did a lot of public domain plant breeding. Like I said, did a lot of farmers markets, moved a lot of moonshine through the farmers markets. That was a great outlet for that. If you have friends that know what you do and they come by the market on Saturday and hell, they buy potatoes and some tomatoes, whatever they want for supper that night. And then, oh, by the way, you got a jar? Well, hell yeah, I got a jar. So, here's a little extra money in the pocket for this thing. But being in the middle of nowhere, everybody and their brother's got a garden. You'd have people like show up at the farmer's market with a trunk load of tomatoes and just start giving them away to people. You can't sell anything, especially if what you're doing is all odd stuff. It's all odd colored, right? So we're trying to select for potentially different health benefits, purple sweet corn and things of that nature. They're high anthocyanin and, purple tomatoes, not like Cherokee purple, but like what they call OSU blue, which is an actual anthocyanin gene in a tomato, odd colored potatoes, things of that nature. People around here didn't know what the hell to do with that stuff at that time. So I ended up with a lot of surplus. So basically when I started distilling when I was 15, I got into it because I was 15, I was underage, couldn't drink, right? And I'm not encouraging that. I'm just saying that that's really what the impetus was. So by my mid-20s, doing this farmer's market thing, you start to realize that distilling is inherently agricultural. And if you have all this excess stuff around that's got a great flavor to it, but you can't eat it all, you can't preserve it all otherwise, well, hell, let's run it through the still and see what it does. I mean, has anybody ever distilled a purple sweet potato? And of course, now I know that they have, and it's been a huge thing in certain parts of Asia for millennia, really. But I didn't know that at the time. And that's how you start discovering these new things. There's actually a really easy corollary here, which I've used before when I was farming. Like, when I was doing the grain farming with field corn and things of that nature, which tie into distilling too, I didn't have any mechanized equipment to go out and harvest that stuff, right? So if I was growing like 5 acres of damn field corn, I was out there, literally had a laundry basket and straps on it like a backpack, just going through, throwing it in this damn laundry basket. And I told people, they'd be like, well, that's a lot of work. I'd be like, yeah. And I'd say, but you do that for 1 year and you learn more about your land and your crops and your farming abilities than a farmer who sits on a combine for 50 years will ever know. And it's the same thing with distilling. I mean, a lot of these guys, and I'm not knocking anybody, but they've not been down that path. So they don't know. They don't really understand. They don't have any tactile knowledge of having their hands on it or doing these odd things. Or, right now we're still in a phase where thankfully we're at this phase, but you have somebody that's going to do something like bloody butcher corn for a bourbon because it's a red corn and it tastes different. And that seems like revolutionary to everybody else. And me, I'm at the point where I'm like, well, hell, that was 15 years ago. What else? What we got? Bring me some other cool shit that nobody's doing,
So you are, I don't know, let's just say handing out moonshine at these farmers markets, right? And
right.
You're probably not really supposed to do that. And so there was just a select group of people who knew that you offered that. But then something happened. Somebody who wasn't supposed to know knew, and then your wife gave you an ultimatum. She said,
yeah. So she basically told me to get my shit together and get a job doing this or she was out. That's what she said. There's a joke for you. But a bunch of people found out that shouldn't have found out. And that's the thing about living in a small town, right? And this is all years and years ago, statute of limitations passed, all that stuff, and no more of that going on. But what happened was we'd go to a party somewhere, right? And I'd have people walk up with a jar. Of course, this is right when that show Moonshiners hit too. There's like first season of that. So moonshine is now part of the common knowledge parlance, whatever. And craft distilling's coming along right at the same time. They kind of blew up at the same time. So people would walk up to me with jars, people I didn't know. And they'd know who the hell I was. They'd ask me to sign a jar. And I'd be like, this can't fucking be good. That like these people know that I'm doing this and they're asking me to sign jars and stuff. And I knew that. And I was probably a little bit more relaxed about it than my wife was for obvious reasons. It's still basically tax evasion is what they pop you for more than anything else, more than any kind of safety issue or anything of that nature. But I was getting a little too big for my britches, both with how loose I was being with what I was doing, as well as we were running at that time. We had converted a 150-gallon milk tank into a still. And this thing was outside, right? It was outside my parents' backyard is where it was at. I mean, covered up with a tarp or whatever. But, man, and I can't tell you how I didn't get busted either, because I can tell you probably at least a good 4 or 5 times that I was outside working on this thing and like the marijuana helicopters come flying over, right? And, of course, what are you going to do? You can't just throw a tarp over this hot-ass still, right? So, hey, what's up? They wave at you. And luckily, I guess moonshining wasn't on their list of important shit that they were worried about. So none of them ever stopped, called the police or anything of that nature. We did have 2 instances a little later on, right before I got hired on at the first distillery, where somebody called us in. I got word of it before they got there, and we had to move everything both times. One of them was in a storm, and I'll never forget calling up my buddies. It was like 11 o'clock at night, and it was storming like crazy. We actually had 53-gallon barrels full at the time. We took 2x6s and put them up on the tailgate of the trucks and had to figure out a way to push these 550-gallon barrels up into the trucks. It was a nightmare, man. I'm not going to lie, but that's what forced me into doing this for a living. So basically what happened is, that's still pretty early on in the craft distilling movement. And at that time, farm distilling still wasn't a thing in the state of Indiana. That really didn't happen until 2014 with the farm distillery bill. So there were no real distilleries I could get hired on in Indiana at that time. Short of, if I wanted to go to MGP or Huber's at the time was distilling brandy and stuff like that. They were just now starting to look at whiskey. So I started looking in Louisville, and basically anytime I'd see that there was a craft distillery coming in that was about to open, I would just harass the shit out of them. And, I had the most bullshit resume you've ever seen in your life. I mean, what do you put on that resume, right? I've been a market farmer for 12, 13 years, whatever, and also a moonshiner. And here's what I've distilled.
Right.
And my dumb ass was like, well, if I get called for an interview, I know how I'll cinch this. I'll just take a fucking jar and it'll be a liquid resume and they'll hire me on the spot. Most of them just immediately said no, or we have no interest or whatever. And then Copper and Kings came along, and I was lucky enough to get my foot in the door there and get started in the industry. They didn't hire me because I was the best person they could hire. They hired me because I was the cheapest person they could hire, which is fine. It got me in, and that's the main thing.
I think that's the key to, most people getting into somewhere. I mean, nowadays everybody's shooting for the moon. They want to walk into the top spot, but you got to get your foot in the industry first and then make a name for yourself and prove that you're not just a Johnny come lately or whatever.
Hey, Streetwalkers, here's a word from our sponsors.
Spirits of French Lick is proud to introduce the Lee Sinclair 4-grain bottled and bond bourbon. This 4-year aged double pot distilled non-chill filtered bourbon has creamy, round, and lifting notes with caramel and vanilla, followed by apple, mint, graham cracker, and ginger, as well as cardamom. The finish is slightly French walnut, resolving the sweet, fruity, almost ground cherry and white pepper. Our spirits are available for tasting and purchase inside the French Lick Winery and Distillery. Spirits of French Lick. Respect the grain. Please enjoy responsibly.
Let's get back into it.
We're not going to spend any time talking about Copper and Kings because that is history. But what it did do is it sort of gave you a little bit of a foothold and, started to help you make a name for yourself. And it gave you something cool to put on your resume.
Right.
So how did you get to the Spirits of French Lick Distillery?
A couple different ways. I always wanted to get back on this side of the river. What in Kentucky they'd call the wrong side of the river, what in Indiana we call the right side of the river. We also call it the Magic River because there's this perception of bourbon that nothing good can come from Indiana because people don't know their history. But I wanted to play into Indiana history. I'm a historian at heart. I love Southern Indiana, even though, like I said, my entire family's from Kentucky. I'm a Hoosier at heart. Even in Pekin, having family that's lived there for 3 generations, they still consider me, quote unquote, the new guy. I think I always probably will be to some extent. So I wanted to get over here on this side of the river, help build up that history of distilling in Indiana, help put that to the forefront and really push that out there and show people what I call this distilling style that's sort of centered on the Black Forest of Southern Indiana, kind of a 6-county region here in Southern Indiana that was full of distilleries pre-Prohibition. So I was looking for a way out of the existing situation. I'd happened to make good friends with Lisa Wicker and Steve Beam. Lisa had worked in the wine industry here in Indiana for years and then ended up in Kentucky and then ended up working for Limestone Branch with Steve Beam. And I'd met up with them through a mutual acquaintance who was on the show Moonshiners, and we became good friends. And so Steve and Lisa were constantly encouraging me to find a job in the legal industry. And this was right alongside my wife, Kim. Lisa was also very aware that I was unhappy in the situation I was in Louisville. So she just happened to know the Doty family up here that runs the French Lick Winery and know that they were looking at putting in a distillery. A couple of other guys mentioned my name to the Dotys as well. And so this was in 2015. And I was literally running out of options for what am I going to do? I can't stay at this place. I got to go somewhere else one way or the other. I couldn't deal with the culture that was there, whatever. And Lisa called me and she goes, hey, these guys want to talk to you and see what you have to offer. And drove up to French Lick, interviewed with them on a Sunday, introduced them to my wife, did the whole thing. And we sort of laid out some parameters of what they had in mind for a distillery versus what I saw that I thought could actually work for a distillery. Because sometimes those two things are not one and the same. A lot of people get into this industry and they think that it's, oh man, we're going to make $1 million overnight. No, you're not. There's too many variables, and you have to take yourself very seriously. And you have to put yourself out there in such a way that makes sense. So that got me in the door here. And, one of the first things I laid out to the Doty family when I came here was they were really interested in making liqueurs. And I said, you guys run a sweet wine business. I said, you're not going to sell liqueurs on top of sweet wine. It's not going to happen. Anybody who's going to buy a liqueur is somebody who's going to buy sweet wine. So do you want to sell 3 bottles of wine or 1 bottle of liqueur? And I said, you also overscaled yourself. I mean, you got a 1,200 gallon stripping still in there, right? You got a 350 gallon doubling still. If you guys just wanted to focus on liqueurs, you should have done like 150 gallon stripping still and a 50 gallon doubling still. I said, if you want to do this and make this work, you're going to need to go down pure spirit route and just do bourbons and brandies and botanical spirits and things of that nature. And for the most part, they let me do my thing. So laid out all the mash bills. The mash bills were all either things that I already had from my experience at home, or they were things that, they might have a concept of, and then I would actually write them out and figure out the beer math and all of that stuff. That's another thing that still to this day baffles me is the slight number of distillers who have any brewing background who actually know how to write a mash bill is astounding to me. I don't know how you become a distiller and you don't know how to write a mash bill. That doesn't make any sense.
For those listening, a mash bill is basically a recipe, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Oh,
yep.
Okay. Now, at the beginning of that, you explained that you were very interested and it was very important to you, the history of distilling in Indiana on the right side of the river, so to speak. Why is it so important to you not only to help build and add to that history, but to share it? Why is that so important to you?
Probably people in every state feel this way, but I think Hoosier-occupied northern Kentucky, in particular, southern Indiana, especially feels this way. So there's so much here, right? Whether it be the history, the natural resources, all that stuff. But if you talk to a southern Hoosier, they're like, oh, there ain't shit in Indiana. That's because you don't know or because you're not proud of it or you don't realize what you have, right? We don't take advantage of what we have. I mean, we've got, Lake Patoka right down the road from here. People in Indiana have no idea. I mean, Lake Patoka, literally, history and everything being what it is, Lake Patoka, we should be as proud of that as anybody in Western Kentucky is of land between the lakes. It's just as beautiful. It's just an amazing resource. So I like to put those things in front of people. I like to be able to prove people wrong on those things where they say, oh, nothing exciting ever happened here. Oh, well, here's a whole bunch of stories that prove you wrong. There were a lot of amazing people here in southern Indiana that really tried to do things with it and really put the word out there, put us on the map. Also, when it comes to distilling in particular, Indiana, Illinois, and Kentucky, if you go back to the excise records, pre-prohibition, those 3 states took turns for who was the leading spirits producer in the United States of America. It wasn't Tennessee. It was Indiana, Kentucky, and Illinois. They were constantly in a battle for who was making the most spirits. You don't hear anything about southern Indiana distilling. It's like people got to the river and they're like, oh, you can't make whiskey on the other side of this river over there because, the magic powers aren't there. It can't happen. Nothing good can come from over there. And so I felt like studying history the way that I have and knowing what I was taught growing up in school, it never gets discussed. You get 6 weeks of Indiana history in middle school, and not once do they mention anything about distilling being agricultural or about farmers distilling and how prevalent it was and how much of the economy was built off of it and how much of it got shipped out. The fact that we were actually making bourbon here at the same time Kentucky was making bourbon. I mean, the name bourbon doesn't come into common parlance until 1821. Bourbon is basically a corn whiskey. We're distilling that exact same thing on top of karst systems. So limestone in the ground, limestone water, same pH, same minerals in the water as early as 1806. And in order for that stuff to get downstream to be traded prior to locks going into the Ohio River, you had to actually cross the river with your product to the Kentucky side to ship it downriver. So who knows how much of that early bourbon that was being shipped out of Kentucky was actually being made in Indiana or Southern Ohio, one way or the other. But I would speculate probably by the 1820s, 1830s, 20 to 30% of it probably was, more than likely. And it's a story that needs to be told. The big difference between us and Kentucky is that after Prohibition, Kentucky had a fantastic publicist and Indiana didn't have anything. And Kentucky continues to have fantastic publicists. So they have Fred Minnick, they have Mike Veach, they have these guys that write and talk about bourbon and spirits. If I'm going to distill on this side of the river, there has to be something that authenticates what I do, especially if it's going to be substantially different from what happens in that very small spectrum of Kentucky bourbon. I have to be able to back that up. So I have to be the historian, as well as the distiller, as well as the mouthpiece, that whole thing. And thankfully, I got help with the mouthpiece part from Jolie, and she's louder than I am. So
That's hilarious. So Spirits of French Lick has a motto, for lack of a better term, and it is respect the grain.
yes, sir.
So does grain have a terroir like grapes?
Absolutely, man. And that's the whole focus of that idea of respect the grain, is that grain has terroir in the same way that grapes do. That depending on where that grain is grown, it can affect the flavors that come through in the distillation. And more so than that, even the different types of grain. So you take corn with different colors of corn, right? So yellow corn tastes different from blue corn, tastes different from red corn, tastes different from white corn. The most efficient mechanism for figuring out those different flavor profiles and differences is double pot still distillation, which is the oldest form of distilling in the world, short of what's called an aquatar, which was a very basic pot still. But pot still distillation gives you this opportunity. You're distilling as much water as you are ethanol. And so therefore that water is what actually carries your flavor and your aroma across. So the more water you're distilling, the more flavor and aroma you get. The other thing that happens is in a pot still, everything is under heat for a lot longer time period, because a pot still is a batch distillation system versus a column still, which is a continuous process where beer is basically fed into the still continuously. And because of that amount of time spent under heat, you're breaking down all these unique long-chain fatty acids into esters and phenols, the finished flavors of the product that you're going to taste. You're also able to pull off some more of that minerality from the soil. And so that was the idea, is we approach this much more like brandy distillers that would have been here in the Black Forest region of southern Indiana. We're after that retention and concentration of flavor. And the formula is basically 50% raw materials that comes from the field through fermentation, through distillation, and then 50% maturation. So it's a blend and balance of barrel and raw material, as opposed to the more common post-industrialized Kentucky column still sort of thing, which I respect the hell out of and love. But that's very much about efficiency on the production side, and then using the barrel to push the flavors that people are familiar with, those vanillas, those caramels, etc. What we're doing is not anything new. This is exactly what you would have found at farm distilleries and small industrial distilleries all throughout southern Indiana and even Kentucky prior to about 1870 and industrialization coming in. And so what we've seen with bourbon as we know it is industrialization comes in, and bourbon as a category goes from, here to here. And then prohibition comes in, it cuts it in half each time. Prohibition comes in, you end up with 7 major distilleries in Kentucky, and then the spectrum of bourbon becomes, maybe if you're lucky, a quarter of what bourbon was originally intended to be. And so that's the idea behind it, is let's hold on to all those unique flavors. I mean, if I'm going to say that I've got wheat in a mash bill, or I've got oats in a mash bill, or rye in a mash bill, or there's purple corn in there with some anthocyanin that gives some black cherry flavors and gives, some of those fruitier sort of characteristics, even blackberries at times. If it's 12 years old, I still want you to be able to taste those base grains, because otherwise, what's the point in using a differentiated mash bill if everything you taste is going to be completely barrel driven and come from that side of the field?
That makes sense. Real quick, just back to the history part, which you're so enamored with. Do you name the products?
Yes.
Let's talk about some of those names.
Yeah.
You got Lee Sinclair and Maddie Gladden and William Dalton. Who are these people, and why do you pick these names? Why did you go the route of picking names of people for your products?
That's the other part of the spirits of French Lick, right? So it's not just the spirits in the bottle, it's the spirits of the local place. So I'm very influenced by that history, but also, of course, music. But then also, I'm a little superstitious, and most traditional distillers tend to be. I have a little bit of an odd belief system, which we don't need to get into or anything. I figure that distilling and putting the name on a bottle and loving history, it's a lot like necromancy is the easiest way to say it, right? So I can write a paper that's 15 pages long about Lee Sinclair and his life, and 5 people are going to read it. But if I put Lee Sinclair on a bottle and I give you a blurb about him, and everything you read in that blurb is absolutely verifiable down to a T to the best of our ability, and you start to associate who he was with what's in that bottle, well, now you have something. Now you've got real magic. Now you've got, the ability for Lee Sinclair to exist in the mind of people in New Orleans who've never heard of him, never knew his story. You've got the ability for this crazy story of Maddie Gladden, who ran a brothel in conservative Salem, Indiana for high-end Chicago businessmen and was married 5 times, twice to the same man, and shot him in the face. That's a story that deserves to be told. Now it's being told in all these other states we're in North Carolina and everywhere else. People know that name, and they never would have before. It would have faded into obscurity. They all have some sort of also deeper meaning to me. So with Lee Sinclair, of course, he was basically a Washington County resident for all of his life. And I'm from Washington County. He started his business in Washington County with his mills and then ended up here in Orange County, which is where our distillery is at and where I'm at now. And we're on Lee Sinclair Street. We are across from the great dome and hotel and resort that he built and that he put his life's passion and life's work into. And so it makes sense that we would name something for him in particular. With Maddie, she was from Salem, right down the road from where I'm at in Pekin and Washington County. She was looked down upon for a long time. The town fathers and town mothers just destroyed her and tried to bury her and tried to revoke any inkling of history that she ever existed to start with. We're bringing that back because I want to remind people when they drive down Main Street, hey, there used to be a whorehouse right there, because nobody in Salem thinks that. You know what I mean? With somebody like William Dalton, that's a tribute to the people who don't get credit in the industry. If you look up Daisy Spring Distillery, you'll come across Springville State Park. You'll read about Hamer, who is the owner. You'll read about Jonathan Turley, but you'll likely never find the name William Dalton. And William Dalton was the longest tenured distiller in Indiana history. He worked at that little pot still distillery in Springville, Indiana for 55 years, running those stills the hard way, having to split wood, having to fire them with wood, having to heat his mash tun with wood, and nobody knows his name. And so it's important to me that, hey, he may not have ever had any money, but he was the one that was responsible for the quality of that whiskey that became so famous and for whom, other people got the credit, and he should get some of that credit. Solomon Scott, the rye whiskey that'll be out this fall. So Solomon was actually a partial owner in that Daisy Spring Distillery for a long time. He ran another distillery in Mitchell, Indiana called the Scott and McCoy Distillery. But what's really important about his story is Solomon got so fed up with the industry, he got out of it and started moonshining. And then he taught his daughter and his son here in Paoli, Indiana, just right down the road, to enter the moonshining business. And the important part of their story is you can travel through Stampers Creek in Paoli Township here in Orange County and still meet families that remember the Scott family, because by the time the Spanish flu came around, their whiskey was looked at as medicinal, even though it was illegal. And a lot of the local doctors wouldn't come to your house if you were sick. But if you called the Scott family up, they'd come to your house with a jar of rye whiskey with whatever herbs were in it, whatever botanicals were in it. And there are people to this day who say that the reason that their family line still exists is because Howard or Bell Scott, one of the two, showed up to their house when a doctor wouldn't and brought them this whiskey.
I think that and I'm sure I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but I'm pretty sure there's a long-running connection between medicine and spirits.
Absolutely.
I mean, we only really see it on TV, when there's somebody gets shot and they pour it on there, in its basic form, I guess it's an antiseptic, but, like you said, with the botanicals and whatever else they're adding can impart all kinds of benefits.
Well, spirits and spiritualism both. I mean, distilling is alchemical in nature, both on a base level and on a very advanced level. It can be medicine for your body, and I still think that it is medicinal in a lot of ways. I won't make any claims about it, obviously, working for a distillery. There's some things you can do with tinctures and things of that nature that definitely have some use in this world. The other part of that is that spiritual thing, and this ties into the names too. It's a door opener. I think every distiller's worst nightmare is that somebody will disabuse their product and hurt somebody or hurt themselves. But for me, the optimistic side of that is that, hey, there's probably somebody today on Friday that's having a bad day, and they're trying to work through something. They're trying to come to some conclusion about their life. They need a break from reality. Well, that bottle's the key to that break from reality. You get into that, it opens up doors. You start thinking in a way that you normally don't think. And maybe it helps you to work through some shit that you needed help working through. You pour a glass of Lee Sinclair, jump on Spotify and look up a Lee Sinclair playlist. Maybe that puts you in a particular state of mind and it helps you get through whatever you're getting through. All of those Promethean gifts that were given to us by whoever they were given to us by, they're there for a reason. They're tools to be used.
Perfect.
Hey, Streetwalkers, here's a word from our sponsors.
Spirits of French Lick is proud to introduce the Lee Sinclair 4-grain bottled and bond bourbon. This 4-year aged double pot distilled non-chill filtered bourbon has creamy, round, and lifting notes with caramel and vanilla, followed by apple, mint, graham cracker, and ginger, as well as cardamom. The finish is slightly French walnut, resolving the sweet, fruity, almost ground cherry and white pepper. Our spirits are available for tasting and purchase inside the French Lick Winery and Distillery. Spirits of French Lick. Respect the grain. Please enjoy responsibly.
Let's get back into it.
I understand you propagate your own yeast strains. What the hell does that mean, and why do you do it?
The reason I do it is I'm a little bit of a Luddite, first of all, but I just think it's cool. I think it's fun to have this sort of control over your fermentation and the destinies of the products that you're making. First of all. Second of all, I do it because I can use yeast strains that nobody else has or is willing to get a hold of or willing to keep alive. So what propagating your own yeast is basically capturing a yeast, isolating that yeast strain, and then constantly building up the population of that yeast strain. So yeast being a single-celled organism that converts sugar into CO2 and ethanol, the alcohol that you drink, etc. Yeast is a huge part of the flavor of pot stilled whiskeys. It doesn't get talked about much in the United States, unfortunately. It doesn't get talked about much in Scotland either. A lot of Scottish distillers, they all use the same commercial strain, and they've put very little emphasis on yeast over the years. But I can tell you that you can leave everything in a whiskey exactly the same and just switch out the yeast strain alone. And that yeast strain will make a night and day difference in the way that whiskey tastes. I mean, off the still, probably 20 to 25% of the flavor profile, the yeast can change that. Now, out of the barrel after a few years, I don't know, maybe 10, 15%, but I think they're going to be pretty differentiated. So I'm not a believer in the word master distiller. I think that's a completely bullshit marketing term. You'll never, ever hear me call myself a master distiller. I do call myself an alchemist, but that's because I figure if you're going to be pretentious, you got to go all the way out, right? Just put the pedal to the metal and just be an asshole about it. But what the distillers used to be called was yeast maker and distiller. And the yeast making was the important part of the job, the most important part, because they knew that yeast affected their flavor more than almost anything else. And so it was their job to keep their yeast going because yeast was not easy to get a hold of at the time. Yeast was, again, a huge contributor to the flavor or the house characteristics of their whiskeys. And so they even had paraphernalia, if you will, for yeasting. Even in the early days, in the earliest days, they had what's called a Donna jug, a copper jug. And they would keep 2 of these jugs. One of them they carried with them like a lunchbox to and from work every day. Kept the active yeast in it. You had to feed it a little starch or sugar every day to keep it going, propagate it, use it for your fermentation and everything. The other one they tie a chain off to and drop down into a well somewhere where it's cold. There's no oxygen. The yeast will go dormant or whatever. That way, if you burn the distillery down, you still got your yeast. You still got a backup for it. And so what got me really into it was this idea that eventually, and this is all very practical versus scientific, but the idea that you have this house characteristic, right? All these little microorganisms that make up the flavor of your whiskey besides the yeast that get in there despite your best efforts. And so what happens if you keep a culture of that yeast and those microorganisms going and try to maintain that and try to use that as part of your flavor profile? But more than that, there were 155 distilleries in that little region I told you about, the Black Forest in southern Indiana. And of those, there's only 3 or 4 extant sites that really exist with buildings on them. And so very few of these distilleries have much history written on them or have a place you can visit. Nonetheless, the distillers may not even have a marked grave. But a few of them, like the Springville Distillery, they still have their old fermenters, their old still. The McCoy Distillery here in Orange County still belongs to the same family. It still has the original wood in it. So that's a piece of living history. I'll go to those distilleries. I'll capture yeast in what's called a yeast trap, which is basically sterilized mash, and bring that back, propagate it, and then let's put that back to use. You know, hey, this hasn't been used since 1880. And it's not the exact same yeast. It's mutated some over the years or whatever, but it's as close as we can get, you know. So we're maintaining a Spring Mill yeast. We're maintaining McCoy yeast. We got one from Old Clifty from down in Cave River Valley. That was a major apple brandy distillery here in southern Indiana near Campbellsburg. We actually have one from Earthbound Brewing in St. Louis from underneath of their brewery. There's some old lagering caves where that used to be an old brewery. And we were able to go down in the caves and capture some from there for a specialty product that we'll name after Lee Sinclair's daughter. And that'll be sort of a little love letter to St. Louis history. So my wife is going to kill me because I've got probably 15 different yeast strains in the refrigerator. Yeah, I don't know how she hasn't slit my throat yet, but we maintain about 5 of them here at the distillery.
Wow. That's amazing. So not only do you distill the norm, corn, oat, rye, whatever, but you also play with a bunch of different other things. You play with fruits and all kinds of other stuff. Have you ever, and there's a reason I'm asking this, have you ever distilled the purple prickly pear from a cactus or actual cactus pads or even jalapenos?
I've not done prickly pear, although I have had prickly pear wine a few times. If it was more commonly available to me, I probably would play with it a little bit more. Jalapenos, yes, a few different times. Not here, but at home I've played with those in a lot of different ways. We've done this weird kind of savory gin thing one time it was actually a potato-based spirit. And then it was rosemary, mushrooms, a little bit of jalapeno, some black pepper. I can't remember what all else went in there. And then I've done, some what they call Geists, where you take grain neutral spirit and infuse those with whatever ingredients you want and then redistill those. And I've done that with several different kinds of hot peppers over the years. Not for any good reason other than just, if I can get a hold of something and I've got a still I can run it through, I'm curious. I want to know. It may not have anything to do with bourbon or brandy or any of those things, but it will inform you to those other arts.
Probably no stray cats in your neighborhood.
That's right. That's right. That's what you call Hoosier Pachuga. So they do the tequila thing with the chicken hanging in it and in the still down in parts of Mexico. We do it with a cat.
Not too far from where I live, there's a place that distills those three things I mentioned. They distill just the cactus pad, and they distill just the prickly pear and just the jalapeno. For the most part, those, coming out of the bottle, they're more reminiscent of tequila, right? But you can't call it that or whatever. So next time I get over there, I'll buy a bottle and send it to you just so you can check it out.
That'd be great. I'm always up for trying something different like that. So.
Sure. Absolutely. And it's just a small family owned. There's like 3 people that work there and whatever. So I know that we're coming up against our time here, but I want you to tell me about absinthe. Why did you start an absinthe? Why did you make an absinthe? And most importantly, why did you name it after my show?
Well played, sir. Well played. I think like most people my age, I've always had a little bit of a fascination with absinthe to start with. In popular culture and those sorts of things. And absinthe, thanks to Ted Bro from Jade Liquors and Lucid, it was able to come back around as a product in the U.S., although under some restrictions back in 2006, 2007, somewhere around there. But unfortunately, there were a lot of imitation absinthes that were really bad that gave absinthe a very, very bad name again for the second time in history, unfortunately. So when I was at the other distillery, I prototyped and produced 4 different absinthes. I actually prototyped a lot more than that, but we released 4 of them. The absinthe program there was really kind of my baby alongside the apple brandy, and it was something I truly loved and was very interested in, and I love the flavor of. So when I came here, I knew that I wanted to do an absinthe. So I always figured I'd be the first distiller in Indiana to make absinthe. And like everything, I always get proven wrong or get humbled by the distilling arts and the distilling gods, as they were. So there was actually a history of absinthe production here in Indiana. In the 1830s, there were 2 commercial absinthe distilleries in Switzerland County, Indiana, which is super cool. It's before absinthe really catches on in Europe anywhere other than the Swiss Alps and in France. And ironically, the people who were there were from the home of absinthe, so Cuvée, Switzerland. They were a colony from Cuvée, Switzerland, and they brought that absinthe tradition with them. But, I didn't want to come over here and produce the exact same absinthe I did when I was across the river. So I took a little different tack to it. I took an old Swiss recipe for an absinthe blanche, or Le Bleu, and distilled that and then added a few little verde ingredients to it to make a white absinthe. And then a little while after that, I had some extra absinthe, and I was like, well, we did a lot of barrel-rested absinthe at the other place, but we never put one in New American oak. And there's no tradition whatsoever of putting absinthe in any kind of strong oak. They would put it in a wore-out oak, basically, to let it kind of settle and mingle back in the day, but never to try to drive color or flavor. And I thought, well, hell, we're breaking every other rule in the book. We might as well break this one, too, and really piss some people off. So we threw absinthe in a New American Oak No. 2 charred barrel, just like our bourbon. And the thought was that you make a hybrid and maybe get absinthe drinkers to come over to the bourbon world a little bit and get bourbon drinkers interested in absinthe as well. So the one-offs that Jolie and I do are very snarky. And she and I work very closely. I'd come up with the characters, but she comes up with the labels, the artwork, all that stuff. And then on these one-offs, we get to have fun with them, right? It's more like thumbing our nose at the industry or playing around. And everything I do, every spirit that comes out has got a musical playlist to it. You can get on Spotify and you can find them, or YouTube and find them. And so you can sit down with the product and drink it and listen to the music I was listening to when I was prototyping these things and coming up with them. And so I'm a huge Cure fan. I'm a huge New Wave fan in general. And I thought, man, Fascination Street, because I love that song. There's one line in there in particular about kicking the last nail in. And I thought, if I'm in the mood to drink absinthe, that's exactly what's up. Just go ahead and kick the last nail in. And so it fit, it fit perfectly. It fit the aesthetic. It fit the feeling of that song. We made a playlist for it, which is very New Wave oriented. Something entirely different, a different aesthetic. And I mean, how many damn hillbillies from Southern Indiana do you know that even know who the Cure is anyways? And other than just hearing Friday I'm in Love on the, the loud system at fucking Home Depot or something.
That's hilarious. So I understand that you're going to, now the one that you made that has the gorgeous teal and green label or whatever, by the way, like I told Jolie, that's one of the most beautiful labels I've ever seen on any product, regardless of whether it was a spirit or not. That is such a gorgeous label.
She did a great job. My buddy Mark Williams, that background is a piece of his artwork, and he's a fantastic artist. But yeah, we wanted that cool, like, pharmacopoeia look to that font and everything too. So
it looks dope. But she was telling me that even though that was limited edition, you guys are going to make another Fascination Street that'll have a different label on it. I did suggest to her, and I'm going to suggest to you too, but neither one of you will really care. I suggest you use my logo on it.
No, I think that's cool. We could probably work that in as even a sticker thing that goes alongside it, like we did the amethyst filtration thing, so that'd be cool. That'd be very cool. We were actually looking at doing a street sign for that original logo, but the way that TTV had us label it, there was no way to get it quite right.
That makes sense. Well, I designed that, so I can give you permission. That's all me.
Yeah.
But again, I know we're headed out here, and this really sucks that I have to end this, but can you tell me what products Spirits of French Lick offers? I know it's a long list, so hurry up.
Right. Yeah, so we got the Lee W. Sinclair 4-grain bottled and bond bourbon, which includes oats, which is pretty rare in bourbon nowadays. We've got the Matty Gladden High Rye bourbon. We getting ready to roll out with the William Dalton wheated bourbon. That's kind of our answer to the Pappies of the world, the Wellers of the world, that sort of thing. These are all bottled and bond. We've got a buckwheat and kasha bourbon that'll be bottled and bond that'll be out here in the next couple months. This coming fall, we've got the Solomon Scott rye whiskey, 5-year-old bottled and bond rye whiskey using basically the old George Washington mash bill that we modified a little bit. We've got the LeBlue absinthe. We've got a true aquavit. We've got an Old Tom style gin. We've got the Fascination Street. There's always one-offs coming out all the time, constantly. There'll be a Catawba brandy probably late this fall, as well as a bottled and bond apple brandy. There'll be a little miniature, like 2-barrel dump of apple brandy. It'll be 5 years old and kept at high proof. That'll be part of the Iconoclast series. There's some apple that's been aged in tequila barrels that'll be out this summer as a one-off. I think it's 3 years old or something like that. I can't remember off the top of my head. Always something new coming up. And to be honest with you, like these one-offs and stuff like that, I forget what I have. Like we go back here and do a barrel tasting. I'll walk down the aisle and I'm like, holy shit, I forgot that I did that. It was like a Tuesday the first year I was here and I was bored, and we had the stuff and why the hell wouldn't I? So chocolate malt corn whiskey, probably this fall, very limited release of it as a bottled and bond, but that'll be a full-time product. The goal has always been to get all the bourbons that are bottled and bond at the very least and to kind of become the craft distillery answer to Heaven Hill. Because I really look up to those guys a lot. So,
gotcha. Now, also, again, we didn't really have a whole lot of time to talk about this, but you have a podcast. Well, what's it called and what's it about?
I co-host Distillers Talk with Christy Atkinson. That is all about bringing on distillers and getting as absolutely geeky with them as what we can. Also, people who are distilling adjacent. We go into the history. We go into methodology. If you're at all interested in home distilling or craft distilling or any of those things, we bring on anybody from moonshiners all the way up through major players. We just finished up, for example, a show with Richard Seal of Foursquare Rum alongside Ted Bro of Jade Liquors, the absinthe line. So we walk both sides of the tracks on Distillers Talk, and it's a huge blast to get to do that. And I learned so much from that show and getting to talk with these other distillers. We've also had a lot of distilling adjacent people on there. We've had some brewers and some cider makers, and we've had a couple of guys that make vinegar or make malt on anything that is related at all to the arts of alchemy. That's the path that we tread there.
Speaking of alchemy, you also have a book. What's that called?
So that's sort of an outgrowth of my little blog, the alchemistcabinet.com. Alchemist Cabinet Philosophy Volume 1, and it's sort of a 100-page diatribe in some ways of sort of my background in making liquor and some of the methods I learned at home for making liquor, as well as that all-important mash bill math that we talked about earlier that distillers seem to not understand.
Real quick, I have heard you described as far as how your history and music meets distillation. I've heard you described as a sort of a latter-day Robert Johnson. And
you didn't actually hear that. You made that up.
I did. I actually did hear that, and they told it to you, and so you heard it too. You just don't remember.
I just don't remember it.
And as most folks probably don't but should know, he is most famous for, his Crossroads album, which I would like to point out that most, if not all of it, was recorded right here in San Antonio. So kudos for anybody ever making that comparison to you, whether you remember it or not.
I completely forgot about it, man. That's all. That's a good one.
I'll see if I can find it and send it to you.
Right. I was probably drunk when somebody said it to me, but I mean, they're not wrong. You got to sell a little bit of your soul to get somewhere.
Sure. Everybody does.
It's part of it. There's a little bit of me in every bottle, I guess.
That is part of it. Earlier, you mentioned a name, Fred Minnick. He did something fairly recently that was catastrophic to your... Oh, no, wait. He did something super awesome. Tell me what that guy did. Yeah,
so Minnick has given us several good reviews of several things, but he put us in the top 6 of his... or Lee Sinclair in the top 6 of his selections and his giant taste-off. And I've heard it said by my buddy Kent Mace that, Lee Sinclair was a very differentiated bourbon. I mean, you couldn't get any different from Kentucky bourbon. And it's 4 years old, and it was up against a bunch of teenagers. And Kent Mace called me after it was over. He's like, man, that's the first time I've ever seen a 4-year-old whip the ass of a bunch of teenagers. So, yeah, I appreciate the hell out of it. And Minnick's an honest guy. He will tell you exactly what he thinks of your whiskey, whether you want to hear it or not. If he gives you a positive review, you kind of got to grab a hold of the reins and hold on as tight as you can, because shit's about to take off.
Now, listeners, Alan, I guess, is too kind to mention it or whatever, but not only did Fred mention that, he loved their bourbon so much and he ranked it so high, but based on his recommendation, they sold out of the Lee Sinclair. That's fucking phenomenal, man. That's really cool. I mean, it sucks for people who want some right now, but that's really cool, as far as keeping the business going and a long-term pride for the Lee Sinclair. That's super dope, man.
I've never seen anybody like Minnick be able to move the needle the way he did. I mean, it's just 0 to 100 just out of nowhere. And it sold us out of pallets. It sold us out of pallets of Lee Sinclair. We do have the next batch ready. It is in the tank. We're literally, like every other distillery in the United States right now, facing bottle shortages. So we're waiting on bottles to come in, but it's coming. It'll be out shortly.
Is the bottle shortage due to a lack of production during COVID?
That's my guess. That's the only thing I can figure out. And I don't think we've probably seen the last of that kind of thing either. So,
fantastic. That's crazy. All right. Well, as we're heading out, Alan, is there anything that I didn't ask you or we didn't talk about that you wanted to talk about today?
I think you pretty much hit it all, other than I just like to reiterate that I do not like Jolie. We are not friends. We are barely acquaintances. She's a useful asshole, but I do not like... No, that's not true. I love Jolie to death. I just like to give her shit. So
that's fantastic. Can you tell everybody where they can find you? Are you even on social media?
I am. I'm all over that thing, I guess. I just wake up to messages of how drunk were you last night when you posted that. So I'm on social media. I don't know how to get to my pages. You can just probably look up Alan Bishop Distiller on Facebook and The Alchemist Cabinet on Instagram. You can find me at thealchemistcabinet.com, SpiritsofFrenchLick.com, and you can pick up, if you're in a certain select 30-plus states, you can pick up our products from Sealbox.com.
Gotcha. And again, everybody, go check out some of those Spotify and YouTube playlists. That sounds like a dope way to sort of unwind and relax with a glass of your favorite spirit. Oh my gosh. Where did the time go? Right. Holy shit. Alan Bishop. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day and your hectic distilling schedule to hang out and let us get to know you a little bit better on Fascination Street, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem, brother. I appreciate being here, and thanks for having me on.
100%. And It's been a while since I've been to Louisville. But the next time I get up there, I am going to take that drive and see if I can't go shake that man's hand. All right?
Yeah. Come on up, brother. We'll get in some barrels and stuff.
Oh, no, that sounds tragic. All right, cool, man. You have a great rest of your day and go make something cool. All right?
Yeah, will do.
All right, take it easy. Thanks, man.
All right, yep. Later.
Bye. Hey, Streetwalkers, it's time for a giveaway. Thanks to our generous friends at Sylvania, we're going to give away some Bluetooth speakers. What do you think? These are fairly special and limited Fascination Street Podcast Edition, as they have a little Fascination Street emblem on the end. This oblong Bluetooth speaker is about 8 inches tall and about 3 inches in diameter, and is IPX4 waterproof. So how do you win? Well, what I need all of you to do is post a short video to your Instagram story, your Facebook story, or even your TikTok, telling everybody why you love Fascination Street Podcast and which is your favorite episode. Make sure to tag the show in these videos, and each week I'll pick one winner to win one of these special limited edition Sylvania Bluetooth speakers, and I'll mail it to you. And I might even throw a couple of other Fascination Street Pod swag in there as well. So tell a friend, tell all your friends, and include it in your stories on Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok. And don't forget to tag the show, Fascination Street Podcast. Opening music is the song Magnolia from the 2014 album Intransigence, used with permission from Douglas Miles Clark. Closing music is Apollo from the 2001 album Into the Known by the band Sapphire. Thanks for hanging out with us and getting to know a little bit about our guest. We'll see you next time on Fascination Street.